What's going on, guys? I was listening to Sean Baker's podcast earlier with Charles Washington, and they said a lot of information that goes against the video I wanted to make on why we shouldn't be eating 4 to 5 pounds of muscle meat a day. And it's mainly because the grain-fed muscle meat they're eating is not nutrient dense. That's why it's not satiating their appetite. They're not getting a proper amount of vitamins and minerals in their body. And the way they cook and salt their meat is giving them an artificial sense of palatability for food that doesn't actually taste good in its raw state. But I'm going to focus on all the reasons about that and kind of talk about what they spoke about on the podcast. So they used Vilhjalmur Steffenson's Fat of the Land, which is a book about an Arctic explorer who goes out and eats these indigenous diet with these Inuits. And they said that in that book they stated, oh, they had a preference for muscle meat and they gave the organ meats to the dogs. No, they didn't. Reread the book, buddy, because they specifically state they have a preference for certain things like the liver of certain fish, the back fat of certain animals. You're not eating back fat. You might have said that in the podcast, but you don't eat back fat from whales or caribou. That's 10 times more nutrient dense than what you're eating. And they specifically disregarded a lot of information in the book to fit their bias, and it's actually the opposite. They actually fed the lean muscle meat to the dogs, and they ate all the fat, all the organs, and everything else. Not only that, they referenced the study done in New York where he ate only meat for a year in a hospital, and that meat back then was grass-fed, much higher quality, and he failed to mention that they did eat liver and fat in that study. You know, they didn't just eat muscle meat. So he misrepresented the information from the book, and he just used it to parrot and kind of justify and give a confirmation bias to his way of zero-carb eating. And he says eat naturally, eat as much as you want, but you're not following a natural way of living. You're not active for 10, 12 hours a day like those people were. You're not eating those naturally high vitamin foods, but you're saying you could eat 4 or 5 pounds of muscle meat because that's what your natural appetite is telling you? No, your natural appetite is telling you to eat 4 or 5 pounds of grain-fed muscle meat because it's a shit source of nutrition. It's plain and simple. It's, you know, and the reason you prefer grain-fed muscle meat over grass-fed is because you're cooking it and salting it to cover up the acrid taste and the rancid taste of a lot of grain-fed steaks. Anyone who follows a raw meat diet or incorporates organ meats or high quality foods into their diet will understand that the reason people don't like organ meats is because of the negative taste associated with conventionally raising those animals. You know, it's the difference between a piece of liver tasting bitter and astringent versus sweet and delicious. And that covering up of the grain-fed muscle meat flavor with salting and cooking is only very apparent when you taste a raw grain-fed steak compared to a raw grass-fed steak, and the flavor in the fat and the meat in the grain-fed steak just tastes off. Even to me, someone who has a poor sense of taste. So he's saying, oh yeah, you could eat 4 or 5 pounds of muscle meat just fine, and he's disregarding that, you know, all that information of, oh, they, you know, those Inuit people used to eat much higher vitamin foods. They did eat organ meats. They were much more active. They didn't salt their food. It's just completely contradictory to what he's advocating for. And not only that, these people, they were talking about how they didn't believe in calories in versus calories out, and they said that your body can't naturally be 8, 9, 10% body fat. That's not how people want to be. Yeah, you know, I think when you're eating 4 or 5 pounds of shitty grain-fed muscle meat and you're not nourishing your body, it's going to be hard to maintain a normal body weight because that's not a natural way of eating. If you have a natural way of eating with normal patterns of exercise, you know, I fluctuate around 8 to 12% body fat, which is much leaner than I see most of these people, and the only constant is that the difference in the diet. I prize the quality of the food, the organ meats, the fat, the nutrient content of the food is what's important to me, and that leads me to eating drastically less food, less calories that satiate me better because they're higher in vitamins and minerals. And they said on the podcast, oh, I'm sure if any people are on this diet and they do incorporate those things, they're only marginally healthier, not even. And I'm, yeah, right, okay. You have 10 pounds of fat around your gut and you're telling me that someone is marginally healthier? You know, please. These people just want to believe that they could eat what they're comfortable with eating and be perfectly healthy. And I'm not saying you can't do that or shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is, don't advocate it if you haven't tried other things. If you haven't tried a raw carnivore diet with high amounts of liver and high nutrient-dense foods, high quality foods, you cannot advocate for the opposite. You can't say it's fine to eat cooked and salted grain-fed meat and bacon all day. It's just contradictory. It's not correct. It doesn't make any sense. And a diet that I follow is drastically healthier and different, lower inflammatory, better for you than what they are doing. I think I've covered all my points. So to loosely summarize, that was incorrect information from the Fat of the Land they took. Please reread that book. They have a preference for organ meats, back fat, and those foods were much higher vitamin than what you're eating now, so I don't even know why you're referencing Fat of the Land. That negative grain-fed taste and negative things associated with grain-fed organ meats are very important to keep in mind. And they also spoke about, oh, you don't have to fast, and fasting is a way to reset to your natural appetite and to understand what natural palatability is. You guys are like, you're living in this modern world where a lot of things are different. You're sedentary, you're not active, you're eating unnatural foods, you're seasoning your food in unnatural ways, and there needs to be a way to get back to baseline. And if you're living in an unnatural way, you probably have to do something unnatural to get back to a natural state, i.e. fasting, restricting calories. And just the fact that these guys think that it's perfectly fine and there's no difference between grass-fed and grain-fed meat or adding organ meats in, and that they think calories in, calories out doesn't work, indicates to me their lack of understanding of nutrition as a whole in general. And the reason I'm different than that is probably because I have a bodybuilding and nutrition background, and because I've tried a bunch of other diets, and I have a very objective way of thinking. But I think that's it, guys. I've covered the points I've wanted to cover, and there's really no advocating when you look at the facts and the anecdotal experiments and things like that. And the only thing that really comes up is you get these closed-minded people that say, oh, that family's been on only McDonald's burger patties for 18 years and they're healthy. What's your definition of health? You know? Are they still drinking coffee? Are they still taking caffeine? Are they still going to the doctor? You don't know any of that. And honestly, I have not seen anyone that has, or I've seen very few people that maintain, shape and energy and things similar to what I like to think I convey in comparison. So, thank you guys for watching. I have to show off my tan somehow, right? But if there's anything you guys feel like I missed or failed to cover, please let me know. I just found it so hypocritical. Please go, if you guys want to, listen to that podcast. I don't even know the name of the podcast. Something like Performance. But just Google Sean Baker podcast, and the recent one with Charles Washington is, and about halfway through is when this conversation starts and they start talking about all these incorrect points that just drove me, I was like, I gotta make this video today. This is so wrong. I forgot to show, this is some grass-fed Australian ribeye, nice marbling, Australia inspected, pretty good marbling throughout the steak, and a lot of grass-fed animals are slaughtered too young, and there's a lack of quality grass-fed beef in the United States. That's another reason, but there's definitely the best grass-fed steak, and good quality grass-fed steak will always objectively taste better than grain-fed steak. And there have been there were a few articles I read about that where they had taste tests and people preferred the high-quality grass-fed, but with the quality of and the young slaughter date in the United States, it's a bit hit or miss, which is unfortunate. It turns a lot of people off to grass-fed meat. I showed that. That's the ribeye with the good marbling. That's the ribeye with the good marbling, and then I have one right below it that has no marbling at all. So, just an example of grass-fed beef being really inconsistent.